reason Grandpappy had to sell the farm is, of course, Ronald Reagan's fault, and the reason for this installment in the Inconsistent miniseries, Everybody Hates Reagan. Now, the United States is the agricultural epicenter of the world. It has been for a long time. Our country was founded on an agricultural economy, and even as we've transitioned through an industrial economy and a technological economy and a service economy, we still boast the biggest agricultural economy in the world. U.S. agriculture, food, and related industries has an annual GDP of $1.3 trillion. To put that into perspective, that's basically the same GDP as the entire country of Spain. But how the agriculture and food industry puts up those impressive numbers has changed dramatically over the past half century. Prior to the 1980s, small and medium-sized independent farms produced the vast majority, almost all, of the agricultural products we grew and produced. By 1990, small and medium-sized independent farms only produced half of our total production, and today it's less than a quarter. And no one's seen, felt, or experienced the change in real time quite like they did out here in America's heartland. In the 1970s and before, every property out here in the Midwest used to be a farm. And everybody was either part of a family that farmed or had some type of business that supported a farming community, like feed mills, implement and parts dealers, grain elevators, auction lots, meat, produce, and dairy processing operations, etc. Now, most of those businesses are gone, and you gotta drive hours to get parts for your tractors. The old local feed mills are few and far between, and the few holdout family farms that still till the land and raise some livestock, they almost always have a real job in addition to the full-time job of farming. A bunch of the old farms were sold off into little pieces and turned into housing developments like that shit I can see from my field over there. And big corporate factory farms control every aspect of the industry from field to fork. But to understand how we got there, we need to understand that these problems started a long time before Reagan. He just happened to be the death blow. And to understand how this all works, you need to understand how the agriculture industry works, or doesn't, and the policies that try to make it work. Now, despite everybody out here being afraid of socialism, farming and the free market do not get along. They are fundamentally diametrically opposed. The agriculture industry is just inherently unstable for two main reasons. First is that market supply is always delayed and always unpredictable. For the free market to function, it requires nearly immediate responses to supply and demand. But in agriculture, you can't guarantee what your supply is going to be, because weather exists, and disease. If it rains too much or too little, or it's too hot or too cold, or you get hailstorms or straight line winds, that can all literally kill the amount of agricultural products that can make it to market. But the demand doesn't change because people still gotta eat, so prices skyrocket and people start going hungry because they can't afford or can't find food. Now, in other industries, when this happens, you see that there's a shortage, you see demand is there, you ramp up production, and you meet it in a matter of weeks or months. But when you're growing stuff, that takes time, so the demand can be there and there's nothing that can be done until another growing season comes and goes. And then you gotta hope that it's better than the last one. Now, in those situations, when farmers lose a bunch of their crops, they're down and out, and the free market kicks them out of the market. And that's bad. The demand's still there. They still need people to grow food. And unlike a lot of other industries, the barriers to entry for farming are incredibly high. You gotta buy land and equipment and seed and fertilizer. You need special knowledge. So once the free market kicks a farmer out of the market, replacing them is really hard to do. But that's the bad years, and there's hopefully few and far between. What about the good years? Well, those are bad years too, because small independent farmers only have one mechanism to make money, and that's grow more stuff to sell. So on good years, when the weather's great and you get a bumper crop, you get a supply flood on the market, but demand doesn't increase because people still eat about the same amount. So the prices for their agricultural products plummet. And when you're a farmer and it's costing you more to put the grain in the ground than you're getting paid for it, what do? Well, you still need to pay your bills, so you plant more and hope you can get enough to cover your expenses. But that just makes the problem worse, because then there's just more supply and the free market does what the free market does and kicks the farmers out of the market. Then you end up with shortages because there's not enough farmers again, and it takes the market a really long time to respond. Then we go through the whole cycle all over again. It's bad for everyone. Now, the instability in food supply and pricing was one of the huge problems during the Great Depression and one of the drivers of the Great Depression. So in steps FDR, and he's a man with a plan. And that plan was socialism, or, socialist policy anyway. The U.S. government started subsidizing the agricultural industry in huge ways. They gave them loans, they set price floors. So if the agricultural industry oversupplied the market, the U.S. government would buy up the surplus and store it to keep prices up. And then in the years when supply was short and farmers couldn't produce enough, the U.S. government would release those stores back onto the market and help meet demand and keep prices down for consumers. Now, this worked great. It solved all kinds of problems, and it brought stability to the market and the family farm. But the world changes, and policy should change with it, and in this case, it didn't. Farming got 400% more efficient between the 1930s and the 1970s. But with that efficiency comes a lot more overhead for farmers. And with the government always willing to buy up all the extra shit they grew that we didn't actually need, farmers were incentivized to grow and expand so they could produce more to sell the shit to the government. And they did that by taking out loans to buy more equipment and more land and more farm stuff. Then the 1970s comes along and Nixon fucks with the global economy by suddenly pulling us out of the Bretton Woods system, and stagflation starts to ensue. And then in 73, OPEC embargoes the Western world for supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War because time's a flat circle and nothing ever fucking changes. So you could have limited fuel you could even get your hands on, and the prices were through the roof. And guess what you need a lot of to farm? Fucking oil. You need hydraulic oil and motor oil and diesel fuel and gasoline and propane. America might run on Dunkin', but farms run on fuel, and there wasn't much to be had. And in the late 70s and 80s, in response to the rampant inflation, interest rates started to go up to try to control it. And for over-leveraged farmers with hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in loans, it was quite literally a crisis. Now, as much as I love Carter, he didn't do shit to help out. He did put a moratorium on farm foreclosures, which was better than Reagan, but it wasn't enough. And the crisis reaches critical mass in 1980 when we embargo grain shipments to the USSR because Cold War is gonna Cold War. Very similar to Donald Trump's stupid trade war with China, this took a huge market away from the farmers, meaning that the price of their grain was even less. In steps Ronald Reagan, and his farm policy is, go fuck yourself. Reagan got rid of Carter's moratorium on farm foreclosures, Reagan cut farm aid in pretty much every budget he passed, and vetoed a farm bill that would have provided debt relief to farmers who were underwater. As a result, through the 1980s, over 300,000 farmers were in default, and over 250,000 family farms went back to the bank. At the same time, Reagan decided it was time to relax enforcement on antitrust laws. As a result, major corporations, who no longer had to worry about getting teddied if they got a little too big for their britches, circled over the foreclosing farms like the vultures that they are. And farms that had been in families for generations were ripped out from underneath the broken families that were just trying to survive by soulless corporations. All while the Reagan administration cheered them on and looked the other way as huge corporate ag monopolies were formed. And that's the way it's been ever since. Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. They've all taken Ronald Reagan's Ray Charles approach to antitrust enforcement with the agriculture industry. And as a result, today, 4 corporations control over 75% of the global agriculture industry. One of those companies is Cargill, right here in Minnesota. It is the largest privately held company in the United States and the 3rd largest privately held company in the entire world. And Teddy Roosevelt is spitting in his grave so hard, the Green New Deal should include digging him up and hooking him up to a power plant. And all of this because when the family farm, the foundation and the backbone of our country, was standing on the brink of extinction, Ronald Reagan yelled, "This is Sparta!" and chest kicked them into oblivion. And as the family farm faded away, so did your reasonable prices at the grocery store. Because when an entire industry is controlled by a couple companies, they can charge whatever they want. And they want to charge you more. And just to add a little more insult to injury, those outdated farm subsidies that are there to protect the family farm, they're still there, but there's no family farms to protect anymore. But corporate ag, an industry that hardly pays any taxes at all, corporate agriculture squeezes $30 billion in federal subsidies in corporate welfare from the taxes that come out of your paycheck. So remember the next time that you're standing there cussing at the malfunctioning self-checkout while you wait for some 70-year-old Walmart greeter who can't operate a flip phone to come try to fix it for you so you can finish paying for your $200 basket full of ramen and great value chicken noodle soup. Just keep in mind that that whole experience is just another reason everybody hates Reagan.